All the roads are windy.
Welcome to the show, Kat. I am really interested in what we're going to get into today, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation since we booked it. I think it's been several weeks that I've been like, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait to meet Natalie." I've been listening to some of your downloads from plants and listening while I've been on my walks, and so that's been a really sort of nourishing way to get to know you through this process. So thank you for putting your work out in the world as well.
Totally, thanks. Yeah, and whew, there's so much we're going to get into, and also just want to let folks know up front that you have a podcast as well. Do you want to share where people can find that podcast and what it's called?
Yeah, sure. So I have a podcast called the Empowered Curiosity Podcast, and it's just a space where we chat, talk about people's stories, and really it's all about getting back to the true self and uncovering all those layers that hold you back from your true self.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
awesome. All right, y'all. Now you have something new to binge on. So, tell us, what are your ancestral lineages?
Yeah, so I am a second generation Korean American woman. My parents came to the United States through Illinois in the 80s, and I was born and raised in California.
Awesome. And
hmm
where do you live, and who are the people of that land?
Yeah, the two places that I call home, they're kind of far apart. But right now, where I'm sitting is Henderson, Nevada, which is the land of the Paiute people. And then I also call Vancouver, British Columbia, my home, which is the ancestral lands of the Musqueam people.
Okay, how did you make your way from like California to Nevada and Vancouver?
Yeah. So it's I was I've lived in California my whole life. I lived in Santa Cruz specifically for about 14 years. And I went to school, got my undergrad, did my master's, built up a practice, did all the things that you're supposed to do, and bought a house and bought the cars and got married and, all like literally like you go down that like checklist of the things that, society deems to be correct or how you're supposed to live life. And I got to the proverbial top of the mountain and was just like, why? Like, everyone told me that this is what's going to make me happy. Like, why do I feel so empty? And at the time I was married and we were struggling to find our way, and specifically I think looking back on it, we were struggling to find ourselves in the relationship without molding and fixing and like trying to fit into the relationship. Like we had put the relationship on a higher level than we had put ourselves. And I went to Vancouver for a conference, an acupuncture conference. At the time, I was working as an acupuncturist and fell in love with the city and decided I needed to move there. And so I ended up getting a job at one of the busiest acupuncture clinics in Vancouver and was able to go through all the hoops and stuff to figure out how to get myself there. And worked at this very busy clinic for 4 years as a fertility acupuncturist, and I completely burnt myself out. Like, I didn't get to enjoy the city, I didn't get to, do all the self-care things I was telling my clients to do, and, I am such a traveler at heart, and I love just being on the road, and, my boyfriend we met like right before I moved up to Vancouver, and my boyfriend lives in Henderson, Nevada. So we just sort of did the long distance back and forth every couple months. We'd see each other. And now I live in Vancouver for half the year and live in Henderson for the half of the year that it's habitable for human beings.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's really
Yeah.
cool. And like, I imagine, Vancouver gets kind of chilly in winter. And so sounds like you have this nice balance of, beautiful summers and then easygoing winters.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm in the process of trying to buy a van or a school bus or something that
Yes.
that will keep me more mobile, and so I can be on the road for, I don't know, for half the year too. I really don't know.
I share that dream as well. And like, oh my God, the obsession is real.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
We'll have to talk
Yeah.
about that more. But so thanks for sharing that. And you have carry in your being now from training and years of experience this just embodiment of Taoist philosophy. Would you and if that's not the way you would like, because I feel like it's not just like thinking, it's really, it's embodiment and living into these principles is the way I see it. But if it's not how you see it, please feel free to correct me here. But um I'd love to hear, like, for people who maybe aren't familiar with this, what is it? And just a little overview.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you for naming that. I think that when we say philosophy, we tend to get kicked into like shoulders on up part of our body, and really I think about Taoism as being a fully embodied experience, and it's really about bringing your somatics online. I kind of feel like our ancient Taoist philosophers were like the original somatic practitioners back in the day. But I think the best place to start is really talking about what Tao is. And then we can sort of like dive into a little bit more nuanced understanding of how that gets expressed. But Tao is and and there's not really like a good English word for it, of course, with a lot of these things. But it's the closest that we can come to is purpose or mandate, alignment. And it's that sense of who you were at the very beginning, before all of those conditions and narratives and stories about who you should be. Like I think about the 30-year-old version of me that needed to break out of like all those shoulds in the world. Um, and and going back and being able to unlayer all those pieces that have kept us safe, because that's part of this story is like we have all these narratives and stories and conditions that keep us safe, right? So we don't want to fracture and send them away from us. We actually want to thank those parts of us for helping us survive and let them feel safe enough to de-armor. And so I think about the Tao as going back to that being who just manifested, and being able to remember who they are. And they came with a purpose, they came with a mandate. And the beautiful part about that is I think that anybody who's on this like personal development self work journey can name like, these are my wounds, right? Like I carry around a big wound around control. Like my ego just loves to latch onto controlling all the, you know, events and factors and people, and really when I've worked with people, your wounding is so closely tied to your Tao, and I've never seen it otherwise. And so, like, one of my purposes in life is to find ways to surrender and find ways to help other people surrender. And so, surrendering doesn't mean like, oh, I just give up. It's really about, okay, so how can I feel safe enough that I don't have to control all the pieces anymore? Right. And so, the wound in the Tao tends to be almost like two sides of the same coin. And so, when I think about spirituality, when I think about Tao, to me, it feels like such a subtractive process. And this is something that I share with my community all the time is like, there's so much out there in coaching, in personal development that's like, I have to go find the next guru. I have to go find the next workshop and find the next, and everything is so externally focused in terms of like, I have to go out there to find and bring into myself. And and the way that I like to think about Taoism is it's about just uncovering what's already been there, and that human has been waiting for you this whole time. And so can we reconnect to that part of you? So I think that is that helpful to like sort of frame what Tao.
Oh, I love it. And thanks for sharing that. I feel like even though I can't claim the knowledge of the Tao through the philosophies and principles, I feel like I get it because it's my own understanding and approach as well is very parallel to that. So I totally get it, and I'm just grateful for the like thousands and thousands of generations before us who have been tuning into this and creating constructs and frameworks, or not just, but like understandings to help us see this as we navigate through a world that wants us to always be looking to that external authority, to
Yeah.
that more, to that information dump that's going to be the silver
Mhm.
bullet. So
Mhm. Mhm.
totally, yes, thank you.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I think when you and I first started talking about collaborating, you had just put out the episode on Earth Speak about yarrow and the medicine of yarrow. And yarrow is such a deep holder of medicine in Taoism. And I actually have it like tattooed on my
Okay, yeah,
arm. I
let's go
have
there. I'd
her.
love to hear more because I'm totally like just folk medicine and channeled. I am like not, and
Mhm.
so whatever you got, let's bring it.
Mhm. And so in the Taoist tradition, like similar to how folks can use tarot cards as just a bit of like I think of them as like bumpers on like the bowling alley lane, just sort of like giving you a little bit of structure. We use a book called the I Ching. And one of the ways that you can, instead of pulling cards, one of the ways that you can actually work with that book is to use yarrow sticks. And so, you work with 50 yarrow sticks, and, how you divide and split the numbers of yarrow helps you come up with the hexagram that you are meant to read at that moment. And
Wait. How does this work? This is, I'm like, my inner child is like, yes, what? Yarrow sticks.
yeah.
Um, so like, is it like just like dried yarrow and then you like toss them or something? Like, how does that actually
Mm,
work?
yeah. So maybe we'll have to do a reading for you at some point.
That'd be awesome.
But I've been working with coins, because another way to do this is with coins, because I wanted to harvest yarrow in a way that felt in alignment to me. And so I grew my own yarrow and harvested it, dried it. And if you've seen yarrow, like they have very, very like straight sticks, like from the base on up. And so like coming up with a bundle of 50 actually was kind of difficult.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the first year I was kind of naive, and I just planted a little bit and didn't have enough, and I had this moment of like being so attached. Again, there's that control piece, right? Being so attached to like I want to be able to, read my I Ching from this space. And so I had to wait a full year cycle to get my full 50 bundle. And so I actually just did that. Like uh, yeah. And, while I was traveling on the road, I would also pick yarrow if it was asking to be picked. And so I've got my bundle of 50 now, and so I'm just now starting to play with it, so I don't feel like I'm like as tuned in as I was when I was using the coins. But it's really about like splitting, like using your hands and your intuition to split your bundle in half. And then like there's several ways in which you split the numbers. And then depending on how many you end up in these bundles, it gives you the particular page you're supposed to land on. So yeah,
Love it.
maybe when I have a little bit more practice, I'd love to do a reading on you. I think it'd
I'd
be
love
fun.
to. Thank you. Yeah. And
Mhm.
it sounds like coins too might have a little more durability through, rough and tumble travels. So I can see yarrow sticks are probably a little bit you need like a lot of care around them. But thanks for
Mhm.
taking us. That's really cool. I've never
Yeah.
heard that. And yeah, thanks. Carry on. Carry on.
Yeah, yeah. And so I sat with yarrow because I there's not really that much information on why yarrow, other than they're like straight and like, gives you a handy stick to work with. And I'm like, but you can use any kind of stick for that. Like, why yarrow? And when I sat with her, because I'd been thinking about getting yarrow tattooed on me for a while, and when I sat with her, I was thinking about the structure of her and how deep her roots go. Like yarrow's roots are very, very deep. And then how straight that stalk is. But it also bifurcates a couple of times, right? And so there's like a couple of ways that the plant wants to move, but then at the very top is this like big cluster of beautiful flowers. And it started making me think about, okay, so this is a expression of Tao because very few of us pick the first, you know, straight road to our Tao, right? We always take a couple of bifurcated paths. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with those bifurcated paths. It's just that it's about, okay, like how do we return back to that structure that we originally came into alignment with? And then that's where the biggest cluster comes from. That's where your biggest fruit is going to come from, is when you are able to align with who you were originally, instead of trying to go all these other paths. So that's sort of how yarrow spoke to me, before I got tattooed. And it was just such a lovely experience. My friend um, did the tattoo, she freehanded it, and like she laid yarrow by my head, so I got to smell her while I was getting tattooed, and it feels like such sweet medicine. And I had literally just like stumbled upon your podcast episode like a week before that happened, and so yeah, it felt in alignment. It felt like there was a little nudge from spirit being like, yeah, this feels good.
That's super cool. I mean, Yarrow's speaking. Can we see your tattoo? So for anyone who's listening on audio, eventually one day this will be on video. Oh, I love it. Yes. Oh, wow. It's beautiful. Whoa.
Hmm.
Wow. Thanks for that. So I have like a million and one questions, but one of the I know there's like we've only just got into what is the Tao, and then there's the five elements.
Yeah.
But I think there's a little, and maybe the five elements play into this,
Hmm.
but I can't help but wonder, in terms of coming back to that, who you are before all these other, th- conditionings and beliefs and things that we were put upon ourselves, knowingly
Hmm.
or unknowingly, or that we're born into, or the systems we're born into, all this. Um, getting back to your Tao, is that like the right way to say it? Like getting back to your Tao? All right. So, like, like I feel like there's the force at odds of the system that is this, capitalistic, like you have to push, force, whatever. I don't know. You have to like do these things to make a living, to pay for this ever increasing cost of life on earth in this system, versus your Tao, which just feels so alive. And it's like life feeds life and it doesn't need this system, but yet we have to be in this system. So like this kind of this at odds of like, well, because I feel this, and I know so many people listening feel this, of like they feel that aliveness, that purpose, that memory or whispering or calling of who they were before all this got put on them. And it's just almost feels impossible at times to be able to like let that come alive in the face of having to just survive.
Hmm.
I don't know. Do you have
Hmm.
anything to say on that?
Yes, I it's such a beautiful inquiry, and I think I want to put a pin in it for a moment, because I want to just frame the five elements first, because I think that it'll play into this conversation of like, why do we live in this like linearly based go 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 hustle grind culture world, when really nature shows us that alignment comes from cycles and seasons. So in Taoism, we look to nature as our teacher, like so many traditional, medicines and spirit practices. Really, it all starts from nature. And we think about it in terms of the five elements or the five seasons. And so it would be wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And that aligns with spring, summer, late summer, autumn, and winter. And so, as you can imagine, there's different energies that come from each of these different phases or seasons. And I sort of use the elements and the seasons interchangeably because it's really we're just talking about energy. And so the first piece is like the wood energy, is it's that like oomph as you're like like a seedling that's just about to crack through the surface of the earth. Like it requires that like bit of oomph. And and so in wood in springtime, we also talk about the emotion of anger. And so we talk about how, if it is expressed in a way that um, is not healthy, it might turn into violence. Or if we suppress it, then it doesn't just go away because it has that like very oomphy energy. It has to come out in some way. And so that's why we tend to see things that get suppressed come out in perhaps irrational behaviors, folks who like the silly example is suppressing how frustrated I was with my ex-husband, and then he would forget to take the trash out and it would just turn into this like big blow up fight. It's because I had suppressed so many other things before that trash didn't get taken out, right? And but at the same time, we don't ever think about any of these emotions or energies or seasons or elements as being bad in nature. And so it's about finding a balance within all of this because if you think about anger, we need anger because every single social rights movement has come from this seed of like, this is just not right and something has to change. And we need to do something about this to create some sort of change. And that's the beautiful energy of a balanced wood and springtime energy, right? And then we go into like fire, which is all about passion, and I think that that is really the element that comes through with the Tao is it's about like what's true to your heart, what lights you up, and so it's about not suppressing that fire. It's about being able to create a sustainable fire that's going to prolong your life and prolong whatever projects you have that feel in alignment for you. Um, so then we go into late summer, which is earth, and it's all about nourishment and it's about harvest. And so like these themes about how, how do I get fed? How do I feed my community start coming up, right? And so you can see how there's potentially an imbalance that can show up there. Like folks who struggle in earth might have struggles with boundaries, being able to say yes or no, being able to really feel into their bodies and know what it is they want and need for themselves, and then being able to voice that out loud, right? And then we go into metal and autumn, which is all about clarity. Like all the trees are losing their leaves in the autumn, and so you get to actually see the structure of the tree. And this is also when we do a lot of pruning in farming, is because you can actually see what's there. And so there's a lot of pruning and like letting go type energy that happens in autumn metal season. And so the sort of things that can come up around here is grief. And so like at the time of this recording, we're in autumn metal season. And so I'm seeing this in my clients, and people are like, I don't know why this is happening to me, but like I can't stop crying, or I can't seem like I'm remembering things from my past and I don't know why. And it's like, because this is energetically the time that you're supposed to actually be doing this work of grieving the things that you've lost, or the things that you haven't fully processed yet. And then we go into water and winter, and that's what our workshop is going to be all about, is fear. And so how do we work with fear in a way that's in alignment? And how do we work with fear? Again, because fear is not a bad thing. Fear is just an energy. And so when we talk about fear, we also have to talk about safety and trauma and understanding that, everybody comes in with their own stories around safety, and particularly when it comes to love, trust, and belonging. And so when fears come up, how can we work with that in a really productive way that feels really nourishing and that feels like we can actually sit with our fear instead of needing to put it away into a box? Like a lot of times people feel into fear and they're like, shit, I have to put that away, right? And the reason why fear is the emotion that's associated with winter and water is because like a lot of these had to do with how people had to survive in life, right? And so back before refrigerators, there was the very real fear of, am I going to be able to feed my family? Of like, is there going to be enough food? Like, is there enough wood to last us through the winter? And so these are very real fears around survival that come up. And so this is why we have these elemental, seasonal, and um and emotional correspondences with each of these organs, or with each of these elements. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Mhm.
And okay, so through these, we were going to put a pin in my question. I wonder if it's
Mhm.
time to return to that, or if
Yeah.
you have more to say about the elements.
Yeah, so like that's the framework that I think about and work with um when I think about my business, actually. And I had bought into this sort of culture of hustle and grind, and growing up in a Korean family where this is the kind of job that you have, and this is how much money you're supposed to make. My parents came with nothing to this country, and they were able to build a life. And so there's always this idea of like, you have to do better than we did, and it has to look a certain way. And so, um, I did, again, all the things right. And I built an acupuncture practice in Santa Cruz, and just felt so out of alignment. Like I loved working with my clients. I loved treating patients, but I hated marketing. I absolutely hated like hustling to get more clients and to get more patients. And so that was one of the reasons why I joined the practice in Vancouver, is because I was like, okay, so I get to outsource that now. Like I can just do the thing that I'm good at, which is sit with people and work with people's energies, and somebody else can do the marketing. And what I found being in that clinic was I hated that too, because it was so like, let me tell you how broken you are. Let me tell you how we can fix you. And I'm going to be the like external source. Again, it's like looking for that external thing that's going to fix you. And working in fertility medicine and women's health, like I just felt like there was this big wound that so many women are walking around with, in terms of, I am not good enough. I have to give my authority to somebody else to fix this part of me that feels very broken. Um, and so I ended up leaving that clinic when the pandemic hit. It gave me a really, um, it gave me a very easy way to walk away from that practice, because I was no longer allowed to touch people. And then when I decided to shift into coaching full time, I was like, there has to be a different way. Like we all go into business and we go into entrepreneurship thinking, I have to hit those six figures. I have to get the 10K months. I have to, hustle and grind. And it's always this like very linearly focused, like get up the mountain as fast as you can sort of energy. And that's how a lot of business coaches actually teach. Um, and what I found is, like, when I sat with how I wanted to approach my business this time around, I was like, this is no different from everything else that I approach in my life that has brought me so much balance and joy and bliss, which is cycles. It always goes back to the five elements for me. And so when I broke it down into cycles of a business, okay, so let's start with metal. Metal is all about clarifying. Again, it's about like shedding and letting go. It's about getting down to the the valuable parts of who you are, and really identifying those and naming those so that you're building your business on the foundation of just like really, really clear intentions and values, right? And then you go into, from metal, you go into winter. And so from the winter, it's about going inward and really thinking about, okay, so I now know who I am. I know who I want to be speaking to. I know who my audience is. I know who I can serve. And so, what is the perfect offering that I can create? And that's a very inward process, I find, because you really have to take the time to slow down and like think about what your clients' needs are, right? And sometimes you might have to do a little bit of market research in that phase. And then that takes you into a springtime launch. And this is where it's like stuff starts to look like on the outside. And this is where we can start talking about, okay, so how do you speak to your audience? What does your newsletter say? Like, what kind of stories do you want to tell? And what does your Instagram look like? What does your branding look like? What does your logo look like? All these things that like are sort of more externally focused, we get to start talking about that, right? And then we get into summer, which is actually putting your offering out into the world and being like, okay, so like let's magnetize people to this fire, right? Let's create this warm like campfire sort of environment so that people are drawn to it just of their own accord, instead of like I have to go out there and manipulate and chase them down and tell them they're broken and try to, manipulate them into buying my product. It's really about really like setting a fire and seeing who wants to gather with me. And then we go into late summer, which is about harvest. And so it's not just about like harvesting the financial success, but it's also about harvesting all these lessons that you've learned in the past 4 seasons and incorporating them and folding them into your practice. And so this is where I start thinking about, okay, so how do I need to create systems for the back end of my business so that my life is running more efficiently, you know? And then that brings us back into metal season. So everything that I've learned from the last 5 seasons, and it doesn't have to always align with the actual seasons that are happening around you. But can I clarify even more? Can I condense even more? Can I be in alignment even more? And then you continue to do these in cycles. And so it gives you the permission to actually take moments to step away from marketing all the time, from doing the hustle all the time. It gives you space to show up in the ways that you're meant to show up. And so I think that this is where we need to start thinking about business, especially as heart aligned practitioners, as helping professionals. Like, we can't expect to help other people create balance and health and healing in their own lives if we aren't able to embody that ourselves. Is that making sense?
100%. And I'm curious if you're willing to share how this looks in your own business. Like, have you been able to follow this protocol and actually pay the bills and actually like get clients and, do what you got to do with money and stuff?
Absolutely. So that was my big fear when I left my practice is, am I going to be able to pay my bills? And I I will say that like part of the gift of the pandemic, and I know that this shows the privilege that I have, is that I was living in Canada at the time that the pandemic hit, and Canada took really good care of their people. And so we were given a stipend of $2,000 a month that I think the US didn't get. And so that gave me just like a little bit of a cushion for the first couple months that I actually launched my practice. But I left my practice in June and sorry, I left my practice in April, and by August I had a full practice
Of 2020.
of 2020.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And I was really, really clear about I only want to see X number of clients. And because I was so scared of getting burnt out again. And since then, I've launched my podcast. I've been able to hire a team this month. I've just done a big springtime launch. And um, I made my starting salary at that Vancouver clinic in 1 month. And and so I think that this is where when we get out of our own way, when we can tap into our Tao, because I really truly believe that my work was not meant to be as an acupuncturist. My work was actually to help people find like their own Tao within themselves. And it's really hard to do that in the structure of the acupuncture world because it is still practiced in a way that is um, very allopathically aligned. And so there's a lot about the way that traditional Chinese medicine has been appropriated and I want to say dumbed down a little bit to fit this Western model of medicine that we have. And so I feel like with a lot of the ways that acupuncturists are being asked to treat their clients, and there are some wonderful acupuncturists out there who are trying to do the work of Tao still, but a lot of it is still very like, I have a headache, please fix my headache. I have a stomach ache, please fix my stomach ache. And we aren't doing the deeper work and the deeper dives of like, okay, so why do you have a headache? Why do you have a stomach ache? Where is this stress coming from? How is your body embodying this? And really looking at your body as the storyteller of your life instead of this thing that's full of signs and symptoms that we need to then shut down. Like we do a really good job of trying to quiet the signs and symptoms that are coming from our bodies because it makes us uncomfortable instead of actually doing that deep dive work of like, okay, so body, what are you trying to tell me right now? And I found that I was feeling very limited in that world. And being in the coaching world now, I feel very unlimited. I feel very like aligned with my Tao. And that's my passion in helping people find is whether it's in business or relationships or just in how you move through the world. It's about helping you remember who you were before all this stuff happened, and before all this wounding happened, because that's where you get to find true abundance. That's where you get to like really build your life to be the way you want it to be.
Well, that's awesome. I'm personally curious. Like, did you get training as a coach when you moved from acupuncture to coaching? Had you already had that training or?
Yeah, so the way that coaching is now is it's an unregulated field. And um and I kind of like that about coaching because I think that again, we have this idea of like, you need to have a fancy piece of paper, you need to have this, that, and the other certification in order to be quote unquote good enough, which is a very, again, like Western culture way of validating people. And when I started looking into coaching programs, I was just like I don't align with that curriculum. Like I don't want to spend the money and the time and energy in in putting myself through a program just because I get a fancy piece of paper at the end of it. And so what I started doing is I started really investing heavily in courses and curriculum that I wanted to invest in. So I did a lot of courses with Gabor Mate, Bessel van der Kolk. And so I did a lot of work around trauma and somatic healing and Peter Schwartz, who does internal family systems. And so I sort of created my own curriculum. And um, and so all of that gets woven into the work with the coaching, but also like the Taoist medicine that I had been so deeply craving to practice and was like learning through books and, you know, through conversations, but I didn't actually get to like fully express that in my acupuncture practice. I feel like that was able to come back alive in the coaching practice. And so I like being able to blend spirit, like the Taoist spirit, with the science of polyvagal theory, the trauma work, the somatic work, all the things that we're learning from Western sciences nowadays that's going so much towards understanding trauma and how our bodies hold trauma. I think that they just overlay on top of each other so beautifully. So yeah, I don't have a life coach certification, but I feel really good and proud of all the things that I have invested in terms of like how to support people, because I feel like that's actually more valuable than just a fancy degree that I got because I paid the money for it and took the courses.
And part of why I asked is because I've been interested in like coaching as well, and I've been looking. I'm like, well, because it would be nice to have some sort of framework to kind of help, but I feel very similar. And I looked at these. First of all, the websites are terrible. I'm like, oh my god, they just have like this information dump, and it looks like it was from the '90s or something, or like 2005. And then it's so much, it's just more of that machine achieve strive, and I'm like, no, this isn't me, and
Exactly.
I don't,
Yeah.
and like, um so personally, I also have just enrolled in the 3-year somatic experiencing training. So that's, I love hearing your your answer is very validating to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's about trauma and like how do we
It
navigate and
is.
heal. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I've talked to several humans who are at the very beginning of like wanting to start their coaching practice. And my answer is always like, don't do something that feels out of alignment for you just because you get a title at the end of it. I actually ended up relinquishing my acupuncture license for California. I was licensed in California and in Canada, and I burnt my Canadian license a few months ago, and my California license comes up for renewal next year, and I don't plan on renewing. And so, to me, it's the wisdom that came from acupuncture and the introduction that I got to Taoist medicine through acupuncture that's valuable to me. It's not my, the needles are just an extension of my own Tao and my own Qi. And so I don't feel like we need to stay so attached to these ideas of licenses and certifications. And yeah. Just as a note, I think the only person that I can think of who's doing coaching training well is a dear friend of mine. Her name's Jessica Benstock, and she runs a course called the Phoenix Institute, and she goes through and she just embodies the spirituality and the science aspect of things so beautifully, and she does it in really deep integrity. So she's the only one that I recommend in terms of folks who are just starting out and wanting to have some sort of training and have some sort of structure.
Cool. Thanks for the rec. And you know, some this is like something that Sean and I talk about a lot, and I'm sure we could talk about it ad nauseum, but just like going and going again. But like, in this story of moving away from acupuncture, where you were seeing people to treat a symptom and to fix a symptom versus so they could like be better machines, to like be more productive, to like so they could not have a headache anymore, so they could go back to work and do the things they got to do, which like no shame, like we're all in this system, we gotta like do the things we gotta do. But it there's this mentality, and you know, that we grow up in so often, so many of us, I think anyone in a Western civilization. I always say so many of us because there might be that like one or two people listening that didn't grow up in this. I don't know, so I give them space for that. But I feel like, but like we grew up in this, and we didn't. If I know for me, I didn't get to like, I never felt quite right in it, but I couldn't see it because I was that fish in the water until I could see the water, and I was like, oh wait, this is it, and this isn't really, doesn't feel right to me. So then coming to unwind that system within, and like, so much of what you're talking about here is taking that shift from uh just following, as you said in the beginning when you shared your journey of like, you kind of checked the boxes and you did these things that you're supposed to do, and you just kind of followed what the system said. Here's what you're supposed to do and how you achieve, and you'll be happy. And but actually you won't be. And like looking, coming back into this, like we are humans, we are nature, we are spirit, and we are like having this experience, and it's not just about trying to survive in this world, which it's so frustrating. I mean, honestly, it's really frustrating to try to survive in this world but feel human. And like, I don't know, just do you want to take us even deeper into how the Taoism and the elements can inform us and help us return back to this? Because I heard you talk a little bit too about like, you know, about how the Tao is really looks to nature as well. And I'd just love to hear more about your thoughts coming up in response to what I'm saying here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the thing that came up for me as you were speaking is it really goes back to this deep experience of listening. Like we've forgotten how to listen. And that's on so many different levels. But to me, the somatics of our human experience is so, so deeply wise. And we've forgotten how to listen to that.
When you say, so if someone's not familiar with somatics, like, can you describe what you mean by the somatics of the human experience?
Yeah, yeah. So, um, really just thinking about physical sensations as information and communication from your body is the simplest way that I can think of it. And so one of the ways that I like to sort of illustrate and get a little bit deeper with this is really talking about the digestive system. And so the digestive system is the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine, right? And so I mean, there are so many people walking around with digestive issues, like so many food allergies, stomach ulcers, acid reflux, constipation, diarrhea. And when we think about what your body is trying to tell you on the somatic level, it is it's almost like it's fucking metaphorical, like the way that our bodies speak to us. And so if somebody comes to me and by the way, like your vagus nerve, which is the regulator of your nervous system, runs straight through your digestive system. But um if somebody comes to me and they're like, I have nausea all the time, I can't seem to keep my food down, if I eat, I get really bloated in my stomach, I have to take Tums all the time. And to me, like what questions come to mind is what are you having trouble digesting in your life? You know? Because our stomach is supposed to be the digester of, like, if you think about it, it takes external things, information, food, and it brings it in and it breaks it down into little tiny pieces so that our body can then absorb it. And so that happens on the energetic level as well. So, what big pieces of information are you not able to break down, right? And what's keeping you in a state of like sympathetically aligned nervous system, in an activated nervous system state? Because if you're in a parasympathetic phase, where's that like rest and digest versus fight and fleas, no, fight and flight, sorry, um, then your stomach knows what to do with food, right? And so if we can start asking questions of why, right? And then if somebody comes to me and they're like, I've got IBS, I've got all these polyps in my small intestine, I've got food allergies, I'm celiac, I have this, that, and the other. Like I start thinking about, okay, so your small intestine, its job is to literally take the small bits of information from the stomach and then be like, this is good for me and this is bad for me. And so it's the sorter. It's all about discernment, right? And so are you having trouble discerning what's good and bad for you in your life? Are you struggling with holding boundaries because you don't know what you want and need? And then in that process, is your body then rebelling and being like what's all this foreign stuff in my body, right? And then taking it back down into the large intestine, it's like, okay, so like, the only thing that the large intestine is really supposed to do, I mean, it absorbs a little bit of water, but, it's really supposed to let go. And so if you're having trouble letting go, then you might run a bit constipated. And so it's like, okay, so, like, what do we need to do to aid you in letting go? Or if you are letting go too much, you might run a, on the side where you have a lot of diarrhea. And so if we can look to our body as a communicator and a storyteller of what's happening in your life, what's happened in your life, your body has so much to share. And and I think that we've just stopped listening, right? And so, it's not uncommon for folks to just be like, I just take Tums all the time, right? And and let's mask these signs and symptoms to make people feel comfortable instead of actually looking at what's underneath the discomfort and really addressing things at the root cause level. And I think that that's where, you know, Taoist medicine is really, really beautiful. Is I think I said earlier that the Taoist philosophers were the original somatic practitioners, because we talk about all of this, because it's like, if you're, and it goes back to the Tao, because it's like, if you're not aligned with your Tao, if you're in a partnership where you feel like you're being devalued, if you are in a job where you don't work well with that pace, that energy, if you're in friend groups where you're feeling like you don't actually belong and you have to put on a mask to belong, then your body's going to have some stuff to say about that, right? And so when we look within and start prioritizing what your Tao is and what your mandate is in this world, then all the physical signs and symptoms start to shift. And so instead of like playing whack-a-mole with all these signs and symptoms, like, can we actually help identify what's out of alignment in your life and then help you feel safe in your nervous system to actually move towards that part of you that wants to express itself?
Makes total sense to me. I mean, I am that person who, had a lot of trauma in childhood and developmental trauma, complex trauma. I'm like, oh my gosh, so much stuff. And my nervous system was just jacked. Like, so jacked. And my digestive system was just completely out of whack. I had so many food sensitivities and like just all constant pain and stomach aches for my whole childhood and up until my mid 20s when I was like, wait, do I have to be like other people don't feel this way all the time? Kind of like the light bulb moment. And since then, I'm in my late 30s now, and it's been a journey of like dietary changes. But then what you're talking about of like, okay, what is happening? I can fully attest to what you're saying of looking at the other pieces besides just the sort of mechanical aspect of it are huge. It's been huge. It's like that's helped strengthen my capacity for conflict and adversity in my life, while at the same time strengthening my capacity for ease and just shifting out of this constant state of like danger, 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 and shifting into expression of who I am. And it's huge and it's constant. So I don't have it figured out, but like I can fully attest to what you're saying because it reflects my journey.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't have it fully figured out either. Like, I am a human being living this human experience and trying to figure shit out all the time too.
Right?
And I think that what's important to highlight in what you just said is it goes back to nervous system regulation. Like, we all had ways in which we didn't feel safe in childhood. And some of us have big T trauma, and some of us have little t trauma that's been compounded over time. And one is not more traumatic than the other. And in that process of learning how to survive in a world that might have felt unsafe, we've come up with tools. We've come up with aspects and part of ourselves that helped us, make it through our childhood and our 20s. And so it's not about divorcing those parts of us. The perfectionist control freak in me needed to be there, because otherwise, like, I had a brother who struggled with suicidal ideologies. And so I needed to control all the aspects in his life because nobody else is doing that for him. Otherwise, I was going to lose my brother. And so for me to say, like being controlling is bad. And so therefore I need to just like put that part of me in a box and just like propel that into space somewhere. Like that's not helpful because that's actually fracturing a part of me that was trying her best. And so if we can look at, and this is where I get sort of cringy about love and light, um, because I think that when we do that, when we fracture ourselves and when we propel those parts of ourselves that we don't approve of into outer space, like we're not acknowledging that that part of us was actually helpful in our lives. And so integration is really about understanding how that was helpful and helping that part of us. And usually that part of us is a younger version of us, helping that part of us feel safe enough and to have compassion for that part of us so that she can just like calm down a little bit and just put down her armor a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for that. And can we like the love and light stuff? Like, um, let's get into it because it is crunchy. It is, friction. Because I feel like love and light has its own shadow side, which you've spoken to, which is the bypassing of deny, reject that part. That's not that part isn't high vibe, so I'm just not gonna give it attention. Versus like, because I've thought a lot about this.
Yeah.
Versus like, um oh, love is seeing those parts. Love and light is seeing those parts and tending to them and their needs, just like you've said,
Mhm. Mhm.
integrating them back in. And I think love and light gets this real bypassy. It's, a lot of just deny aspects. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I think a lot about that. And like over the years, I've been like, screw love and light. But then I'm like, no, it's all about love, but it's not about denying. It's about integrating through the lens of love because because why, what else do you can, what else do you want? What's better than that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Thoughts, pushback, whatever. I'd love to hear because I think this is a discussion that kind of a lot of people have in their head, whether knowingly or unknowingly.
Yeah. I think that we're essentially saying the same thing just with different language, which I totally honor.
Oh yeah, and I wasn't wronging you at all. I was
Yeah,
just
I don't
saying
feel that
this is
way.
okay, good, good.
Yeah. And like I think that what you said is just so profound in terms of like it's really all about love. And that's totally right. It's not about like bypassing and because then it becomes another way that we're like taking Tums but spiritually, you know. Um, so like if we can look to those shadow parts of ourselves and really integrate and bring them even closer within. I think Elizabeth Gilbert has this really beautiful analogy in her book, Big Magic, where she identifies those parts of herself and she talks about, I think, fear specifically. And she's like, you know what, fear? Like, you get to be a part of the conversation. Like, you get to be in the car with me, but you don't get to take over the wheel. Like that's the seat that I sit in and, you know, I interpret that in my head as like that's your Tao, you know, that's the true self that sits in that seat. But fear is going to be there. And I think too, when we look at shadow aspects as being bad and we look at the like happy aspects and the happy emotions as being good, like we're just doing the same thing that, you know like Western culture has basically done to everything, is there's like a good and bad guy to every aspect of our lives, when really what we know from nature and what we know from Taoist medicine is there is no good or bad. Like there is no good or bad emotion or feeling. Even if anger is hard for you to express, that doesn't mean that it's bad. Sometimes we actually need that anger to push us through a certain aspect or to hold a boundary or to say, that's just not fucking right, you know? And so for us to label things as being good versus bad creates this sort of dynamic where if I am angry, then I am a bad person, which is not true, you know?
Totally, totally. And like the duality of it, of good or bad, it takes us into such an analytical mode where instead of actually being in the direct experience, we're analyzing whether it's a constant like, am I good, am I bad, am I safe, is this, and like instead of actually being in relationship. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
whew, yeah.
Yeah. And whenever I find myself going into binary thinking mode, like when I start thinking about good versus bad, to me, that's an indication that I am in an activated nervous system state. So that means that I'm in a sympathetic state. I'm in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode. Because if you think about, we all evolved from bodies that were running away from predators. And so if you are running away from a bear, there is no time for you to think about, oh my gosh, like, you know, what are the nuances of the situation? Is this bear needing to feed herself? And like, I need to accept this bear for who she is. And, is this like, no, like the things, the messages from your nervous system state is going to be fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Like those are the four choices. And most of the time it's narrowed down to fight or flight, right? And so whenever there's this binary thinking that comes up, it's an invitation for me to check in with myself and be like, okay, so why do I not feel safe in this moment? And what do I need to create for myself so that I can feel safe enough to find nuance in this situation, right? And so I think that this is I've had a couple of conversations with my colleagues and friends on the podcast about this because we're in this weird cultural moment right now where, your best friend is suddenly the enemy because she is not getting vaccinated, or your family member is we can't talk about politics at the kitchen table because, your uncle is the enemy now. Like, I think that to me, when I zoom out and I think about the trauma training that I've been through, like we're just looking at people who are carrying a whole lot of trauma and it's being overlaid onto this cultural moment right now. And so the invitation I think that a lot of people who are doing this personal development work are being called to is how can I regulate in the face of this trauma, and how can we heal from this collectively and accept other people's choices for what they are instead of trying to manipulate and control. And it's happening on both sides, right?
1,000%, 1,000,000,000%. I feel like everyone listening is like, yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Well, I know this has gotten me even more jazzed for the workshop you're going to teach. And
I'm so
in this
excited.
workshop, yes, which will be in December 2021. And oh, in our collective. And we're going to get into, in the Northern Hemisphere here, even though we have people around the world, but we're, mostly in the Northern Hemisphere. We're going into winter as this workshop will come out, and we're going to be getting into the fear element. Do you want to share a little bit about what you'll be guiding people through in this experience?
Yeah, yeah. So I want to really get into water and talk about water as a teacher, and I've got a lot of really beautiful analogies that I've just come to having sat with water and in the messages that she's given me. And it's not just about sitting with fear. Like, I want us to be able to walk away from that workshop having tangible tools to work with fear. And so I'll be leading us through guided visualization. I'll have some journaling work for us to do. I think that there's so much about fear that can feel really overwhelming. And so to create a container and a structure for us to sit with fear and feel safe enough to sit with fear is going to be my intention. And I've got all sorts of somatic and experiential tools that I like to use because I think there's a lot of and this is totally me several years ago, like there's a lot of us who want to go through fear like from like a top down approach of like I shouldn't feel that way, and so let me think about this in a rational way, and let me, try to fix this from headspace, and let me understand this.
Let me intellectualize my emotions.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I did that for many years in therapy as well. And so this is where I think talk therapy has its limitations, and where I think a lot of therapeutic work is moving towards is somatic experiencing, is because it only takes us so far, because we really, really need to be able to access that part of us that felt fear, maybe back from childhood, maybe, back from our 20s, and access those stored memories and really think about therapeutic practices coming from a bottom up approach. And so, like, really inviting your body into the experience and asking your body what is needing to be expressed and what's needing to be shared in this moment. And doing that in community is so, so beautiful. I think co-regulation is such a huge part of nervous system repair, and giving your nervous system new experiences that feel scary, but you come out of it on the other side alive. Because the fear with your nervous system is like, if I do this, then I'm going to die, right? And so if we can go into those experiences and do that in co-regulation and community, because that's some medicine that has been forgotten, quite frankly. I think that there's so much space for healing and so much space to really get into our work here.
Beautiful. I'm really excited and totally resonate with all that. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And what are you offering in your in the beginning we shared that you have your podcast and um you have so much to offer. So do you want to just share with folks a little bit about that and where they can find you?
Yeah, so everything is through Empowered Curiosity. So my website is empoweredcuriosity.com. I'm on Instagram at Empowered Curiosity. I'm on Facebook, but I'm not really super active on Facebook. I don't know who is these days. And yeah, I do one-on-one work with folks. And I also do business alchemy mentorships, and all that information can be found on my website.
Beautiful. And of course, that's in the show notes, everybody. And wow, thank you so much for just coming to hang out with us and share some of your story and wisdom. And really super, super stoked for this workshop and glad we got to meet and chat today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I'm really friendly on Instagram. So if anybody out there is like, I have some questions about whatever it is that we talked about, shoot me a DM. I love having conversations with folks.
Awesome. And of course, again, that's all in the show notes, y'all. Sweet. Well, we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
All the roads are winding.
Listen to over 200 free Earthspeak podcast episodes on your favorite podcast app and visit earthspeak.love to learn about our collective community and workshops.